Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show planned out for you today. We're going to be talking about the dark side and all of the stuff in there. Why do we do bad things? Why do we want to do bad things but don't? All good stuff. All good stuff. Now, I'm going to make another disclaimer that we are not doctors. Well, except Doc C. He is an actual doctor. So, but anything we do say is our own experience. That way, we're not. He is an actual doctor. Whoa, I got an echo there for a sec. Doc, I think your audio is a little. That's all good. Totally, it threw me for a loop. Hold on a second. Let me get.
You're
right
all
back
throwing. I watched you throwing
it, right?
yourself like about 3 seconds in. You just started talking, and I could see you weren't prepared to talk.
My apologies, everybody. My apologies.
That's all right.
I was still thinking about my
Reset.
Imperial Cog. Yep, here we go. So we're talking about the dark side, which again layers what I was saying earlier. I'm wearing my Imperial Cog just because I like it. I put the music of the Imperial March on the post today because I think that the dark side has a there's almost something desirable about it, if you know what I mean. There's the ease of it, to just let go, to allow it to flow through you, kind of deal, as they say in Star Wars. But while I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want to say and how to bridge all these gaps, I hope everybody else can like the show, subscribe to it, and hit the notification bell. That way you get your little email every day. Now, with that out of the way, are there any initial thoughts on the dark side right off the bat, either from Shaun or Doc?
I'm just accepting the request to push up the rock concert poster right now. Bam.
Doc, you're up.
You're up.
Right. I guess one of the difficult things, a few years ago, I like to read in bunches on a topic. So I'll dedicate 2 or 3 months on a topic, and I read a lot of material, different books and different things on it, research and whatnot. And when I decided to choose evil, I thought it was going to be a lot simpler. I thought it was going to be black and white. And then I realized it's not. So defining evil became a huge issue. And I think it's one of the crucial elements here in this conversation today is what kind of evil are we talking about? Because evil for one person may not be evil for another. I remember I wrote a book a few years ago on terrorist recruitment. And it was interesting because when I was starting to talk to soldiers who have been in Iraq, who have been in Afghanistan, whether from our military in the U.S. or from other soldiers or from Iraq soldiers, you had that phrase that came up: one's terrorist is somebody else's revolutionary. Sometimes one's evil is somebody else's good. One thing that always comes to mind is Dexter, how you can flip that around and had a lot of people were more accepting to the fact of a serial killer. There was a post I did a while back ago on a serial killer, I think is in Eastern Europe, who went around targeting pedophiles. And this is one of the few times that serial killing seemed to be approved. So I'll lead it up with that, because evil is a lot more complicated than I thought it was.
Absolutely. Shaun, you got some initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think it comes down to on which side of the fence you stand on, and what is the purpose of the act. And so you can do something kind of diabolical, but if you're standing on a certain side of the fence, it seems justifiable. And so diabolical and justifiable, you can insert any words you want there, but I think it just comes down to humans will find a way to do something and rationalize it. And there'll be other people who'll observe it. And because they haven't already pre-rationalized it, they can't understand the evilness of the moment. And so how does evil start expanding? Because that's of greater interest to me. Like the definition of evil, it is I wouldn't say it's murky, but you could look at it from a whole pile of vectors. But the more concerning part, let's use the analogy of Chance's t-shirt. So some dude decides he's gonna do evil, and then he gets a little gang, and then his gang starts expanding. Well, once it starts expanding is when it becomes a problem. Because if you're in your own little garage thinking about evil things, but not doing anything or not expanding the evil footprint, all right, do your little thing. But the moment that it starts becoming bigger, or more correctly, I'll use the term, once it gains critical mass, once it gains its own almost self-created momentum, that's when it becomes a problem. And so, you know, you look at the Imperial forces, or you look at the Death Star, or these kind of things. Like the Death Star at one point wasn't even a scrap of metal. It was just an idea in someone's mind. Some evil dude who had justified it, that if we create a planet killer and destroy a planet, we can justify that because ... And so before that first piece of metal gets welded to the next piece of metal as the first step in the Death Star, someone had to have the idea and thought that it was good. Maybe it's Oppenheimer. And then someone had to say, let's fund it. And they had to rationalize it, and they thought that was good. And then at some point, as it's being built, more and more people are getting involved. More workers, more welders, more plasma whatevers, all of the people doing all of the Death Star things. Once that critical mass starts to gain velocity, people stop thinking about what they're building, about what they're doing. They lose sight of what the outcome of it will be. They just engage in the practice of, this is going to create a thing that I don't understand, but I know it's going to do planet destruction. And someone said, that's okay. So I'm just going to keep doing my thing. I'm just going to keep welding and welding. Oh, look, we built a Death Star. I think that's what we were supposed to do. And all of a sudden, planets are disappearing. And it all started with one guy who justified an act of evil and got other people to buy in, until the critical mass and the velocity that self evolves itself is allowed to take effect.
I like that a lot. I I was thinking very early, my initial thoughts were that evil as a whole it's a slippery slope. It's one of those things that you can rationalize a little evil, right? You can rationalize, oh, I'm not gonna make my bed this morning. Okay, well, how does that make you an evil person? Well, it doesn't, but it opens up the idea that you can get away with something else. Okay, so I was talking about, how do you become a thug? Yesterday we were sitting there like, you don't just go to a job interview and become a thug. It has to start somewhere. You have to, see some gang members in your neighborhood, and then you have to know some gang members in your neighborhood, and then they have to invite you into the gang, and you have to join and be like, yeah, okay, cool, yeah, I mean, these guys seem like good guys to hang out with. And then maybe you're involved in a robbery. Maybe you weren't. You were just there. They did it, and you were just there, but you didn't say anything. And then it slowly builds and slowly builds and slowly builds over, decades, until you're a contract killer that's completely rationalized. Oh yeah, no, I do this because the people owe this person that blah 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 blah. And it's all in those little choices. It rarely is it a massive choice between good and evil, where you're like all of a sudden thrown into this going, you need to massacre this town. That's a rarity. That does happen sometimes, but it's a rarity. It's usually a built up thing. And that's usually the only way you can rationalize, or get humans to rationalize these acts, is because they're slowly built upon other smaller acts that just slide you down that slope, if you know what I mean.
I agree with both of you guys. I think it's, the key word, I think, for what both of you said, is rationalization. It's one of the scariest things we can do, because we can rationalize anything. You've heard people who are looting, as we see currently in some of the states and cities, and then they rationalize it, but they have insurance. They have money. They can pay for this. The system has done me wrong, and then they just rationalize their behavior in one way or another. It becomes very problematic. And Shaun's interesting. I have to think for a while, but Shaun's really got real theoretical there. I had to really start hanging around with the Death Star thing analogy. But it's true. It doesn't just happen like both of you are saying. It takes a little bit of time. And, my favorite word, it's going to be multifactorial, right? There's going to be a lot of variables that are going to create it. And it starts with childhood a lot of times. The individual can start seeing parents' behaviors. Hey, what happens if your parents take something? Right? And all of a sudden they, oh, this is okay because they don't care. Or this is a company. They have plenty of it. And they start witnessing stuff like that. That's going to have an impact. Gangs is interesting too. But I'm not sure if Shaun was referring to, it sounded like his was a bigger scope, like a group to an organization. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Group. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the reason I was kind of building it out that way is because I then was, maybe this is premature, but I was then going to bring us back into this point, and that is, look, name a kid who enjoys putting a black robe on and walking down the hallway with his friends, and they're all wearing black robes, acting like Darth Vader. Kids dig on that because it's a feeling of power, it's a feeling of stature, it's a feeling of authority, it's a feeling of representing a powerful individual stomping down the hallway, doing deep breathing. Some kids dig on that. Some kids dig on being Obi-Wan Kenobi. But there's a certain appeal to a sexy outfit. All of the troops marching by in their black outfits, looking like Terminator 9000s. If you give a kid a chance to make a decision between looking like a elite stormtrooper in black armor versus some raggedy hobbit in some raggedy robes over there in a dusty corner, they want to be the Terminator 9000, but they don't understand what each one represents. They just have an attraction to a representation of power and authority and stature and comfort with shaping the world around you by just saying, do this, do that, versus, the raggedy guy in the robe. He's not appealing. And so all from an early age, children are they're not forced to make a decision, and they're not programmed to make a decision. From an early age, children just get to make a decision. But as their parents or as bystanders, we also should be able to help them shape those decisions by saying, why were you so attracted to being a stormtrooper wearing black armor? What was it about that? And then have that further conversation instead of, buying black outfits for all the kids in the neighborhood and creating your own squadron of evil Darth Vaders marching around. You know what I mean? We could draw a lot of comparisons to how the world has played out in not too distant history, and how it may play out in the future, and why it plays out like that, and what is evil, and why do we have an appeal to these things when we know that dark power that you're pursuing is wrong, but you're willing to make a small you'll overlook a little bit of it to get ahead into that dark empire. What is it about humans, Doc, that lets us kind of slip into that sexy black evil, if you will?
I'm going to say that I don't mean you in this regard, but people a lot of times will look at somebody doing something and view themselves as doing it. And this is where it gets dangerous. A lot of times it's actually, everybody's got different motivations. So I'm going to tackle your group thing for a second, because your group thing is different than an individual, like a psychopath, for instance, or a serial rapist or anything like that sort. But they have different agendas and motivations. But for groups, it's interesting because anonymity is huge. So you mentioned the black robes. We know some groups, leaving nameless for now, that were running around last couple of years all over the place, causing all kinds of weird things. And they were all black with black masks. And I know COVID kind of messed that up, but they had everything going on. But the anonymity studies have shown that it increases a person's temptation to do something without being caught. We know that as well with Twitter. When I did research on the terrorist recruitment from ISIS, it was really fascinating because they hit on exactly what you said. And they knew it. They were psychologically very smart and adept. They were targeting people who were marginalized, people who felt like the society didn't care about them, nobody wanted them. And all of a sudden, they saw the winners. They saw these winners winning because that's how they portrayed themselves. At least ISIS did, right? ISIS kind of distorted Islam and created their own prophecies out of stuff and changed it around and made it look like they were fulfilling the prophecies. And people looking at it going, wow, this is crazy. And of course, the American media blew it. And maybe other countries, I just don't watch their media, so I don't know. But I know they blew it because they were hyping it all. Oh, look at this. Another one. Oh, another one. Oh, another one. Oh, even the general's wrong. And they kept hyping it. And ISIS would rerun those clips. And they would show, look, America's scared. The generals are scared because they say we're too powerful. And they just kept highlighting it. And then finally the generals figured it out. But back to your point, Shaun, it motivated a lot of people who were just sit there going, I got nothing in my life. And that individual is different than some of the other ones we can talk about later if you want. But that individual is going to look at it and go, wow, that black robe gives me identity. That black robe gives me something that I didn't have. Everybody's going to listen to me now. An interesting movie was that Joker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he kind of developed that. You can kind of see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a movie, but still, you can see it
appealing to the powerless to become powerful through identifying with a group that looks powerful.
Tribalism is huge.
Tribalism for sure, and it's it's the politicization of problems without actually like affecting the problems. It's just politicization of it. You guys ever seen the movie The Wave? It was an old TV movie from the 80s.
I don't think
like
so.
Back early. I remember this. We actually watched it in school, in high school.
Did you actually?
I did. Yes, thank you for that. We watched it in school, and so the movie itself is about a high school teacher doing an experiment in his social studies class to see if he could reinterpret or revitalize, or not revitalize, that's a bad word for it. Basically, teach the kids why it's so easy for the Nazis to come to power. And that's where it started. So he started a new club, and people became part of that club. And then they started wearing armbands, and then they started taking over the school. And then they started and it became this, this whole new thing. And it's actually a really good movie in terms of how you can see the social connection to it, in that it gives people purpose, right? If somebody doesn't have a purpose and all of a sudden you offer them one, hey, we're going to bring order to the school. We're going to bring order to the galaxy. We're going to bring, you can give them a direction, and then you can start skewing what it is you're saying. I mean, that's how cult leaders and all kinds of other large groups or figureheads have brought large groups together to do evil things, is that they give them a purpose at first, and then they skew it.
I mean, the average ISIS recruit took about 4 to 6 months. And what they did is a lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about throughout your collect, not blaming you, but talking about the importance of friends and things of that nature, connecting with real conversations. They're not stupid. What they would do, say, hey, Chance, come on over. We're having a barbecue. But they never talk about any terrorist acts. They just talk to Chance. Give them barbecue. Sean comes over. What's up? How are you? My name is Sean. Everybody's connecting with you. Really, Sean? The Chance, that's what you do? That's really cool. Chance comes back. Hey, what are you doing Thursday? Nothing. Chance has got nothing going on. So come on over, Chance. We got another party. Comes over going. After about 4 or 5 visits, Chance feels like he fits in perfectly. Then they start getting into a little bit of weird, Chance, I'm sick and tired of this politics, this group, this government is sick, Yeah, I can see that, because he doesn't want to disagree. He's got all these friends he never had. People are liking him. After another month or two, then all of a sudden it becomes, hey, Chance, why don't you go with this meeting we're going to? Hey, Chance, you want to do this with us? Before you know it, collective's gone, and Chance is an anarchist somewhere. But honestly, it takes 4 to 6 months.
I see it happen. I see it happen in social media, and I see it happen with people I know. And it's not that they're being turned into extremists. It's they're being not carefully, maybe quietly led down the garden path, and they're unaware of it. And so, every little bit of news bite that they read that has something to do with climate change, whatever you believe in, whether it exists or not, it doesn't matter. That's not my point. The point is this, that whichever side you're on, if you are not careful, if you do not apply critical thought, if you do not hold your space as a rational, logical human being and observe what you're reading in the now, rather than focusing on all of the past things that you've read and just keep building until you've read so much and you believe so much that without critical thought that you find yourself standing in a position with a placard and maybe setting something on fire because somehow it all made sense. But you require critical thought. You have to observe every single thing in front of you for the relevance of it in the now. And so some friends have sent me these things and said, this doesn't exist, or that is what happens. And I'll challenge them with, really? How did you come to that conclusion? Or, I don't think so, pal. That's way off base, and here's why. I will challenge a person for sure.
Doc, you got any other thoughts here? I got some comments I was going to hit up here. Anything else?
I got lots of thoughts, but it's up to you if you want to hit the comments.
All
I
right,
mean, yeah, go ahead, hit the comments.
Let's hit these right now. So salty drink sense, once it has momentum, it can become socialized through exposure and simple indoctrination. That leaves room for the expansion of the scope and means used to reach that goal. He carries on, and it's going to build its own microcultures and backlashes and even lead to the radicalization of individuals, 100%. That said, we also lose sight of the root cause by the time it reaches a certain mass. Absolutely. Satch has a great one, American History X. It's another great example where, I wanted to go back to this part here. Once it has momentum, Shaun, you were talking about this right at the beginning. There's a critical mass point, right, where, a bunch of people sitting in their basement shouting slogans, saying things, right? That's a bunch of people in their basement. Cool, man. Like, y'all have fun over there. But once it starts to expand to the point that they're harassing people in the street or burning down buildings or, blockading other businesses, things like that, where it starts to become, starts to affect everyone around you, that's when it becomes a problem. But unfortunately, by the time it is that problem, it's already a culture. It's already a set up system, right? So any thoughts on what do we do with that? How do we deal with that? How do we engage that?
Yeah, you got to push back. You got to challenge it. Like if someone says, I'm an idiot. Okay, I've been an idiot in the past, but how did you come to that conclusion? Like you got to qualify your statement. Why are you saying the things that you're saying is what I'm going to challenge a person with? I just think that we give way too many hallway passes. If someone says something insane, you can't let the insanity spread like an insanity virus. You have to say, hey, bro, like enter into some box breathing right now and just regather your thoughts because you are not a lizard. So I think that in respect to someone in their basement having these ideas, that is not the problem. The problem is when it starts leaking out of the basement and you don't say anything about it. Because it's always going to develop in basements. It's always going to leak out of basements, but you have to stop the leak. You can't watch it spread right past your feet and wonder how much it's going to contaminate the neighborhood, how much it's going to contaminate the country. You've got to stop the leak. When you can challenge the leak, you got to stop the leak.
Good point.
It's interesting because I think social media, the conversation you guys had yesterday, really has increased the ability to propagate those individuals in the basements per se.
For sure.
Right? Because now you can reach thousands of people who are like, hey, wait, that guy's like me. He's thinking like me. And there might be 10,000 of these basement dwellers, I guess we can call them. And these individuals now have joined together. And we saw that in some of the looting events and some of the things that we've seen in the last few years where people are connecting from different states and traveling to go to these states and cause all kinds of chaos, which could it have happened 30 years ago? Yeah, but a lot slower rate. A lot slower rate. I mean, I was doing some work. I can't name the group that I was working with, but we were tracking some of these, monitoring some of this activity. It's within seconds. They're telling each other where the streets are. They're telling where the cops are. They're informing each other immediately. And it was like, whoa, this is insane. 30 years ago, you remember 30, 40 years ago, guys. I mean, I don't know about Chance, but 30 years ago, if I said, hey, Shaun, let's go get coffee down the street at 3:00, if he didn't show up, I have no way of getting a hold of him. If he's not at home,
you could write me a letter. I'd get it 2 weeks later.
Yeah, I'd be pissed off saying, where the hell were you?
That's
right. And then he writes back saying, oh, something happened. Oh, sorry. But, in today's world, it's in seconds. I can see Shaun. I can even see where Shaun's at if I wanted to. Where you at? I'm over here. Okay. You're tweeting each other in seconds. You can find out. And that's really changed the dynamics of the criminal enterprise. And ISIS took advantage of it for sure. They exploited it considerably because they had a huge reach. Now they didn't only have 300 million in the U.S., they had 7 billion around the world that they could act. And think about how many, I hate to call them basement dwellers, whatever you want to call them, individuals like that. Even if it's 0.1% of 7 billion, if anybody's good at math out there, you're talking 7 million or 70 million. It's really high numbers. So I don't know. And by the way, human beings were naturally inclined to good groups. So I don't want to make it sound like everybody is in a group. But hey, if I'm a Dodger fan, all of a sudden, you know how that goes if you're a baseball fan. And AC/DC person who loves rock music compared to somebody who likes classical, that's going to be already something there. We attach to groups almost everything we like. You guys remember Beverly Hills 90210?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Remember the classic, oh, they're a 909er?
Oh
They're
yeah.
already identifying somebody by an area code.
Yeah, right.
It's hilarious how we box people in.
Do you know
It's,
what's funny? Sorry, go ahead, Chance.
I was just gonna say I was gonna add to that was the fact that like the Crips and the Bloods and all the gangs in the South Central LA and all that stuff, they were broken down into like 3 or 4 block groups, and it was just like,
Sure.
oh, you're from 6th Street, well, and like seems kind of crazy, but if you need to make a division, there was a division. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, so funnily enough, I like AC/DC and I like classical. And I think that's an important point to make, because you don't have to be either or. You can be many things. And so, but I have a specific question for you, Doc. I've never thought about it before. Of course, where we're at right now today, with the ability to communicate back and forth across the internet at light speed, of course, these things are happening quick. So people are getting organized. People are saying, I'll meet you on that corner, and bam, there they are, waving their signs. Now, 30 years ago, that couldn't happen because the communication network wasn't there. However, let's pretend for a moment, as a thought construct, that network, that communication speed, that ability to connect was there 30 to 40 years ago. Do you think it would have been different? Because I do.
Yeah, I think it would have been, because I think society was different.
Yes.
This is going to lead down a rabbit hole probably, but
Perfect, because that's where I want it to go.
okay. Before I do the rabbit hole thing, let me just say Salty Jinx is right about ISIS, and that definitely had a huge influence by those guys, but Muslim Brotherhood, et cetera, and AQ. But they capitalize on social media like we've never seen it like that before. And of course, the social media idiots kept it going until they figured out, oh, we got a problem. But that time it was, back to Sean's question. Yeah, I think society has been different. I'll give you this example, Sean. Maybe you'll appreciate it. You a comic book guy?
Yeah, I was when I was a kid. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. It's interesting because if you look at the history of comic books and I think TV shows, I used to love Lone Ranger. And the distinction back then between good and bad was simple. Lone Ranger wore white or light blue, and the bad guys usually always wore black. We could kind of see who was bad and who was good. In the 70s, it was actually a law where you couldn't represent somebody. You had to represent the evil person clearly. It had to be distinguishable, even in the comic books. You couldn't have something like, I can't tell if this guy's good or bad.
I didn't know that. Was it a law?
It was a law for printing. I can't remember exactly what it was. So if somebody wants to correct me, that's perfectly fine too. But I can't. I know in the 70s.
In the spirit of it, okay, it makes sense. Okay, check.
Yeah, in the 70s, they changed it. And what ended up happening at that point, they could blur the lines. And all of a sudden, you were having a little bit more of a difficult time trying to figure out, was this guy bad, good? Like Batman's changed, right? Batman's kind of like this mixed, complex figure, which I actually I'm going to be talking about him this week on ethics and morality and how complex Batman can be, because he's doing things maybe you shouldn't be doing. And he is doing them. And I know a lot of people are going to probably say, which is true, again, multifactorial. It could be religion. There's a decrease in religion. You don't have to be moral. You don't have to be religious to be moral. You could be an atheist to be moral. But there are different factors in that case. There's different depictions of evil on TV. Now there's, over the last 30 years and 40 years, TV heroes or movie heroes sometimes are doing things that aren't good. You guys ever see The Wire?
Oh yeah, great
show,
great series, great.
And
show.
who did everybody love the most? Omar. He was the most popular character, and yet
I suppose he was. Yeah,
and he was one of the most evil ones there. Well, kind of, but he was, and it was interesting because that's how the movie industry switched. Now all of a sudden we like the antagonist. Where in the 50s and the 40s we loved the agonist, the hero, the protagonist, all the time. And that's just one idea. The social media influence of it. I think parenting is going to be another one. Parenting has changed. I think religion. There's a lot of factors, but that's my thought on it, Sean. I don't know. I'm curious to see what you thought.
Well, I'd throw out this, and I don't have it clearly defined because I haven't given it much thought up until you went multi-generational with 30 to 40 years. And I tried to figure out, well, what was the difference? this is just my loose theory, quickly formed up just prior to me asking the question, and it's as such. As Chance has already said, I also feel it's the issue. It's a slow erosion of politeness. It's a slow erosion of being a good person. It's a slow erosion of just being cool. It's a slow erosion of just doing the right thing. And so 40 years ago, I'll do a real clear comparison. It doesn't matter whether it was a farmer or a businessman or a hobo. It doesn't matter what a person's role was in society 40 years ago. If there was a lady walking towards a door, the guy opened the door and held it. And that's the way it was. Now, it is not the case. And so, over the decades, there's been a slow erosion, either through laziness or shifting cultural norms. It doesn't matter what it is. There's been an erosion of just the little things that make us polite to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it seems so easy nowadays to not hold a door. It actually is now easy to sneer at someone. It is now easy to do whatever you want because no one is doing nice things. No one is holding anyone accountable to the nice thing. I remember it'd be about 2 decades ago where I saw a lady walking for a door and a guy was coming out and he just let the door go. And the lady kind of like stuttered and she was expecting the door to be held open for her, as was I. And when that guy just let that go like he didn't care, as he was walking by, I gave him the side eye and he knew what was up. I didn't have to say anything to him, but he was guilty as guilty can be because he knew that he had done wrong. But if I hadn't given him the side eye, that's the slow erosion of the cultural goodness in a society that just slides away until no one cares about anyone. We're all disconnected as human beings, and we're all just in our own little selfish worlds of getting what we want. And then once we're there and we aren't identifying with anything, then what happens? Now we're looking to identify with something. Now we see the sexy little black outfit go marching down the street. Ooh, that looks powerful. I'm not part of something. I want to be part of something. Next thing you know, you're flying a Death Star blasting planets.
It's a great corollary. I was just thinking that there's the flip side of this too in terms of politeness, is that politeness begets expectation, right? If you look at, say, like the Victorian era, where politeness was the norm, if you weren't polite, yes, you would get the side eye. Yes, people would talk about you behind your back and all that good stuff, but there was an expectation that that door was going to be held. And then that person could slow roll it and make you sit there and wait while they rolled past the door and then gave you a side eye for holding the door or sitting there and looking at your watch or anything, right? Because you were not giving the proper courtesy in their mind. And so I'm always a little hesitant to look at in terms of, politeness versus courtesy versus all these other things. There's got to be an intention of courtesy. It can't be a forced courtesy. Otherwise, it's not courtesy. It becomes a force. You're now a doorman. You know what I mean? That makes sense?
Yeah, but culturally, so I'll give you an example of, and you guys have seen not photos. You guys have seen drawings of this in children's books or in old-timey history. And it would be a lady about to step out of a carriage, and the gentleman takes off his robe, lays it down on the floor or on the dirt, on a puddle, so that the lady doesn't have to step into a muddy puddle. She steps on the cloak and walks into the whatever, and that's kind of not really expected every single time. But if a gentleman did that, it was considered almost chivalrous or almost honorable or notable or extraordinary. Not every man did it, but the heroes of the story did it. And so our heroes have changed, man.
Mm-hmm.
like heroes used to do that kind of stuff in society's mind. But now what does a hero do? I'm going to ask you guys, what does a hero do nowadays in these kind of modern senses?
That's a much more ambiguous question. Doc, you want to take it?
I figured you're going to slack it over here. But to Sean's point, and this is, I keep bringing up TV and movies, and I think Sean's alluding to the fact too about the heroes, is we haven't really lived in a society like this in the last 80 years ever before. Yeah, the Greeks had plays, and I get it, and they had gestures and stuff, but it didn't impact everybody because not everybody could see them. So there's only certain groups of people who actually could attend these things.
That's good.
But it happens every so often. But I know here in the last 80 years, we do see it a lot. It's the first time I've ever seen in the last 80 years where people learn how to interact with others, how to be nice, how to behave. Sean made it, I think it was you or Chance made the challenge the other day to go out and talk to people.
Yeah.
Well, we can watch how to interact with people through movies and TV shows. And if you go back to Sean's ideas of politeness, you go back to Leave It to Beaver, if everybody remembers that. Very different show on how they interacted with their parents and how Eddie Haskell was a problem. And how they about how the dad explained things, just like Sean mentioned earlier, to the son about, we don't do this. This is why we do it. And as you go on in life, those shows changed. And I always ask my class the question, should shows depict what society is right now, or should it depict what's better, how to be better in society? Because I think a lot of those shows taught us how to treat each other, how to communicate feelings. One of the best shows, I get it, he made some tremendous mistakes, or not even mistakes, he was a criminal, was Bill Cosby. I get it. But his show was one of the best shows I've seen for parents and interaction between the children. The Cosby Show was amazing. When the children would come home, they would talk about real problems that they had in life. The challenges of getting a haircut, the challenges of going to high school in certain clothes, the challenges of things like that. And that was really powerful. And that has seemed to have started to sway away. Now, back to Sean's question about a hero. This is what I was saying earlier. They've blurred what's good and bad. Now the guy who's going to get laughed at is the guy like in the Breakfast Club. The one with I forget, Judd Nelson, who played the role.
Yeah.
That was everybody's favorite. The clean cut kid, Emilio Estevez, was kind of the whatever he was, too tight, or I forget what the word is for that.
It was a bit out of an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, well, wait a minute. Did I like Judd Nelson's role? Yeah, I liked it and appreciated it. I would never do it, never advocate it. But that's where it gets really weird. Because you get back to critical thinking. But go ahead, Chance.
I was just thinking that, we kind of mentioned this the other day, is that these things get propagated because they're extreme. The reason Judd Nelson's character is the popular one is because he's doing the extreme thing that everybody else wishes they could do. Like, I wish I could rebel, or I wish I could do that, or man, I wish I was more open and honest, or any of those things. But the hero archetype is, Sean, we were talking about it on D&D, right? Is the paladin, right? That's the hero archetype. It is the one that is always upstanding, always truthful, always this, always disciplined, etc. And the most popular characters are the anti-heroes, right? They're the ones that are, they're kind of bad, but they're also kind of good. There's a rationality to it, but it's the extreme. That's what I think is so drawing to it, is that it's so outside the norm for the average person. And I had a thought on earlier, you were saying, there might be a bunch of people in their basement, and there might be 10,000 people in their basement, which seems like a large number, except for the fact that there's 300 million people in the US. So 10,000 people is a very small amount of people, but online, those 10,000 people can become way more. And then they can propagate that continuous extremity of, you can go a little farther. I mean, some of the heroes are doing this too in the realm of the internet. You look at the Jockos and the Goggins, is in the push yourself, go a little harder, go a little farther, do a little bit more, do more. I mean, even us, do your best. Do your best is an ambiguous statement, right? It is your best, but the best what? Best in what? And so that leads to interpretation. And if that interpretation becomes negative, then it can be drawn down that path again. You start making those choices to eliminate that little bit of politeness or that little bit of discipline or that little bit thing over time, step by step by step by step.
Can I ask you, someone point out something really quickly? That 10,000 though, I don't know if I should even say it, but that 10,000, if you even get 1,000, that's a huge problem for most police departments because they can't even handle 100 or 200.
Yeah.
You can see when they start getting riots that are big, they back off. That's what they're told to do because they can't get in the middle of it. They know it's going to go chaos for everybody. People are going to get hurt. And I'm not trying to disagree with you, but I'm just saying even 1,000 could be a huge problem if you dump them into a little city with 20 cops on duty. They're done. Yep. They're going to be sitting on the sidelines and hopefully corralling everybody. And this is when you get the military. They'll come in if they really need a problem. So it's interesting because, yeah, it doesn't seem like a lot when you have 300 million, but you're not getting 295 million who are coming to the aid.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. We got a couple comments here that I wanted to hit on. You got any thoughts, Shaun, before we do?
Yeah, I was going to jump into a whole diatribe about the first book I read when I was a young boy that really made me think about this was The Lord of the Flies. And then I was going to go into how powerless men try to identify with the military, though they've never served, and they try to gear up to become powerful in their own minds. And then I was going to ... but wow, would we need several podcasts for that? So I think we should just go straight to comments.
Okay, let's do it. That is fantastic. So Carl says, this is a great question. Do you think that the loss of hope factors into people reaching out to evil things to find purpose? I think that's a big one.
It's exactly what ISIS was doing.
Yeah.
That's what ISIS was doing. People who didn't have hope. Carl's right. That's what they were looking for, is people who didn't have hope. I read all their magazines. I interviewed former ISIS guys. They're extremely sharp. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had one line that always stood out for me in their little pathetic magazines, but one of the lines that they had was, does life seem too boring for you? Does nobody care about what you say? Is working 50 hours a week for the rest of your life really the life you want to live? Come join us. And I'm looking at that going, I'll be damned. They targeted the existential factor of a human being. The person who is sitting there right now, who's 45, 50 years old, maybe no family, very few friends, working 50 hours a week, got nowhere to go. This means something to me. Back to Shaun's comment, I like the black robe. Mm-hmm. Yep, let's go to the Death Star, baby. And it's kind of interesting. So yeah, Carl's right. That's definitely one of the key factors.
Shaun, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, and it is that loss of hope, that sitting at home and thinking that nobody cares, and you're hardly even caring for yourself at that point, and you're just sometimes desperately looking to latch onto anything that will make you feel like you have a sense of purpose. And it's in those moments where you have a foggy mind and a foggy purpose and a foggy trajectory. It's at that point where you feel like you're a little cork on a really rough ocean, that you'll reach out for any life vest that you can. And that life vest could be the wrong life vest. And so hope for what? What is your hope? Hope to survive another day, or hope to be a good person? I think some people just hope to get by another day. I just hope that the day gets better. I just hope, without a clear definition of, I hope I can join the right team. Mm-hmm. And then very simply consider the team as evil or good. What team do you want to join? If you're really hoping for a future, don't move beyond the binary point of dark force or light force, because it can really slowly corrode your understanding of what you're hoping for if you had no definition of what you're striving for. And if you can't figure out the nuances of where you're ultimately going to go, make it super duper simple in the non-clear moment of Darth Vader, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Make a choice.
Yeah. Again, I miss your mic tosses. Those were fantastic. So another one here, Satch kicks in with, my daughter just said, heroes are supposed to be helpful. And she's 6. And I think that's great, because heroes are supposed to be helpful. But helpful can be ambiguous in and of itself. And I love the idea of hope, because Fran, I had him on the Tools for Toolbox. The first time he gave me this line was, "Hope is not a course of action."
Mm-hmm.
And you need a course of action, otherwise you're
That's
just
right.
lost. Salty Jinx says the Punisher is the quintessential modern anti-hero whose extreme appeals to a rational person. Those who ought to have known better still cheer when he dumps a box of 5.56, and I think that is 100% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things where that's the extreme, right? This person deals drugs to kids. Gone. But there's a whole system in place built around dealing with that. Yet we want to skip the system because it takes too long. And that was one of the points I wanted to make earlier, was the fact that evil, darkness, the dark side, lends itself to speed, time, right? Whereas the good lends itself to length, like learning over time, versus the dark side is now, right? I want to take that guy out now. Okay, cool. Do that. Well, that's the dark way versus there's a process. We got to catch him. We got to arrest him. We got to take him to court. We got to do all the whole, like, there's a process. And that, I think it's a very, very hard, it can be a very clear distinction at times, but it can also be very murky. So, and then last comment here I got is Salty Jinx says, hope needs goals to guide it. You need that target to aim for and keep you on track when you're faced with options that conflict with your end goals. That's a good way of putting it too.
Yeah. Why, how, and at what velocity?
There you go. Yeah. Doc, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm writing them down so I don't forget these damn things. You get 51, you forget everything. Yeah, it's interesting that Shaun's correct too. It's one of the biggest issues I see in society is the binary problem. Politics, they call it Hobson's choice. Either that or this, right? And we see presidents do it either for us or against us. How about if I don't care either one of the sides? Is that possible? Which of course it is, but you'll see it a lot. You either, especially nowadays, they really push it. I know a lot of people will push it. You're either shop at this store, you wear these kind of clothes, you're this or that, and they create these little divisions, and that starts really amping everything up back to the group mentality. But the other thing too is interesting. You mentioned something, Chance, that it requires time and it requires effort sometimes to be good. We know a lot of the major religions talk the yin and the yang. Christianity talks about the dark and the light. Everybody's known this for thousands of years, and we have this internal challenge. I mean, I always tell my class about Plato and his story about the chariot, where he has two horses, and one of them is emotion and one of them is reason. And the charioteer is constantly trying to balance these two together, because one's trying to take the chariot one direction, the other one's taking it the other, and we're constantly striving to fight that. You can even add good and evil in that component if you wanted to, trying to do the right things compared to what feels good or what would make us happy at that moment. So it's fascinating to me that 2,000 years ago, and here's a plug for the collective, because I think the collective is an environment that's bringing back the way they used to do that in the philosophy 2,000 years ago, when Plato would sit around with other people and talk about ideas for 4, 5, 6 hours. And they would hammer these things out. And they would go back to the Hegelian principle we talked about before. They hang out this idea, that idea, the opposite idea, gel them together and morph it and continue to develop and think. They didn't have time for Candy Crush. They didn't have time for any of this stuff. They just really spent time chatting about life. I mean, if you look back and you think, holy crap, we think we're so smart. And they knew about this 2,000 years ago. The emotional component that overtakes our mind. Yeah, no, we're not that. Yeah, we're smart in different ways. We're smarter, definitely. But in some areas, it's kind of funny. And I do want to end with, at the end, let me know, because I want to end up with a little bit of, kind of ironic, I'll say this, but hope that I do see something good happening in society in the next 20 or 30 years. And I guess I can, whenever you want me to share the good side.
Hit it.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for a little bit of good news.
Yeah, I know. It gets dark when you talk about the dark side, but I think we talked about this. I can't remember which show we did. Oh, by the way, folks, if you want to learn more about the collective guys, you can listen to the podcast, right? Is that okay to say?
Yeah.
Because we learned a lot. I learned a lot about you guys, and I think you guys even learned a little bit about yourselves. That was kind of
I'm learning here every day, man. It's crazy.
It's one of the best parts about it. Right before you get into your story about hope, I just wanted to hit on this one thing. I put a post out earlier today on Instagram. I just shared it, and it was a post from ancient Japan. It says people romanticize their plans but dread the execution. The magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding. And there's lots of these posts all over the place, right? There's lots of these little statements, these little things that are, that people have thought about 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 200 years ago. It doesn't matter. Like, these are all questions that we've been all asking ourselves for millennia. And we are slowly coming to, I don't know if we're coming to any answers, but I think
I disagree.
I think, no. What's your thought?
Because you used to be a good example of someone who posted all those things and didn't give it any thought.
That's
Am
true.
I wrong?
No, you're right. Yeah.
And so that is the difference between critical thought and simply passing on thought without thought. And that's how society doesn't grow, is by just passing around thoughtless thoughts that aren't thought about. If you want to improve the world around you by spreading wisdom, you can't photocopy it and stick it up on a wall and then walk away from it. You've got to give your opinion on the opinion. You've got to place a position on the position. You have to, if we're going to use the metaphorical, photocopy some wisdom and put it up on a wall, you've then got to stand next to the photocopy and explain why you think that's important. Or every time somebody walks by and says, "Is that good news?" you can say, "I think it is, and here's why." You've got to use critical thought on these wisdoms, and then you've got to explain it to those around you why you think it is wise, not just pass on another thoughtless thought that no one thinks about.
That is a good point. And it actually brings up a really interesting thing I enjoyed about the Book of Five Rings. Because every time Musashi would make a point, he would say, this needs to be considered deeply, or it needs to be meditated on, or it needs to be thought on, not so much just accept it as gospel. Think about it. Engage the thought process. I like that. I got one more comment here, and then Doc, we'll get into your story of hope. Salty Jinx says, I think the answers need to be found by the individual. By having and challenge to their ideals, by having challenges to their ideals and values, that's where Shaun leads the game. Yeah, I think so.
I do challenge everything around me for sure. I challenge myself most of all, but because I challenge myself a lot, I challenge those around me as a default position. And it's not that I want to disagree with anyone, or I don't want to. I don't want anyone to think, "Oh, yeah, I'd never thought about that." It's not about that. It's just about the people around me. I want them to challenge me. I don't want to be constantly challenged myself. I have to challenge them to challenge me. And so by saying to Chance, well, buddy, this is how you were doing it, but now you're doing it differently. If Chance would say, yeah, and because of that, now I'm doing it for other people and blah, blah, blah. We can tease out the nuances of how it's a good thing, not a negative thing, rather than just saying, hey, you're a goof for saying that. See you later.
Yeah. 100%. Doc, let's hear your story of hope while we're talking about the dark side. I love it.
No, it's funny because I know that comment about Instagram posts and stuff kind of goes along with the opposite side of imposter syndrome. You have a lot of imposters on social media who act in certain ways, and they're just doing whatever just to get the clicks and the vibes. It's an interesting world over there in social media land. The reason I say hope is because I know, I don't know if I've talked to you, I can't remember who I talked about this, but anyway, I know we see generational cycles, and they used to happen about every 25 to 30 years. Usually it's every generation that comes around. I think it's speeding up, and I'll explain why in a minute, but every 25, 30 years, people will do the opposite. A lot of children, not all of them, because you always get somebody who's got to be the anomaly. There's always something people don't, but most children, maybe you guys did the same thing, they're not going to start listening to their parents around 18 or 19 about the music they hear. What do you listen to that for, Dad? Why are you dressed like that, Dad? And you get that. But then what happens at 35, 40? My dad used to listen to this. My mom used to listen to this, or they used to eat that. And then all of a sudden it kicks in. It happens to most humans. I'm not going to say all of them, of course, but to the overwhelming majority, I've always heard it's usually the same stories. My 20-year-olds that I talk to will laugh because they'll like, oh, yeah, I guess so. And they'll kind of do that. And why do I say that? Because I think we see the generations dictating. And in today's world, the business world dictates a lot. The TV shows we watch are based on the age of the demographics. And the age of the demographics now is what? 15 to 30, 20 to 30. So that young range, they're going to dictate what they watch on TV. In the 70s, the age range was older. That's why you had older heroes. If you remember, Barnaby Jones and Marcus Welby. Well, what kind of hero was that? But that was what it was 50 years ago. Totally different than today. And the generations now are speeding up. Because now if you know where the 15 and 16-year-olds are going and how they're viewing the world, I'm starting to hear a lot more of, what the heck's wrong with these guys? What are they doing? This is weird stuff. And there's already polls coming out that they're becoming, again, this doesn't have to be this way, but they're becoming more religious. They're becoming more antithetical to whatever's going on now, whatever the culture is now. They're starting to grow away from it. Very normal. We see it every generation. Think about it. The hippies, 60s and 70s.
Yeah, rebels.
What was the 80s all about? Yeah, in the 80s was about what? Clean cut, ABCs, always be closing, Boiler Room, Wall Street. Then it shifts back again. Before that, it was the 1930s and the 40s. Everybody with the zoot suits in the 50s. I mean, everybody was clean cut. Hair was really short trimmed. If you went Back to the Future, bam, 60s, everybody goes to the hippie 70s move. It happens every 25, 30 years. Beards are in, beards are out, long hair's in, long hair's out, big glasses, and it keeps shifting. But even the morals, values will shift. And I guess my hope is that the next generation coming in the next 5 or 10 years are going to change it again, because the market's going to go, oh, they don't care about this stuff anymore. These anti-heroes are gone. We're going to have to bring back Superman, the good guy who's always good. We're going to have to bring him back in, Captain America. We're going to have to bring all the clean-cut people back over. So it's interesting to see it. I mean, there are huge generational differences. Of course, that's what we want. But I do think it's a better course.
I always called that the generational pendulum.
That's right.
Because it just swings back and forth and back and forth. I've said that a number of times. Shaun, you got any thoughts on the pendulum or the hopeful 5 years, hopeful 15 years?
Yeah, I think my hope is that the collective is going to change some people. Now, I don't think we can change the world. I'd just be happy if we can change one person, and that person can change 10 people, and those 10 people can change 100 people. So those kind of changes will occur invisibly to us. We'll never see the impact that we make in respect to that, I don't think. But my hope is that while we have the collective going, it will encourage others to just have hope for betterment in the future. That's really what we talk about here every day, I think, is becoming a better person, increasing your mental health wellness, all things positive. We're trying to move forward down a trajectory of becoming a better human. And hopefully there's some traction there out in the people who are tracking what we're doing or how we're talking with each other or the subjects that we talk about and how we address them. Hopefully it will encourage others to not just join us, but to do the same themselves, to speak with others in the manner that we're speaking with each other today and on the subjects that we're speaking about. No one has to go PhD deep with their neighbor. Just be positive and talk about things that aren't often talked about, but with a positive mindset. I think we can change our neighborhoods day by day. It's a slow process. Nothing positive occurs overnight. Evil, on the other hand, can. And so just focus on the positive.
I think that's key. And one of the tenets, especially, I'm going to go back to Star Wars here because I'm a Star Wars geek, is the fact that the dark side is all about power, right? Across the board, that is in every movie, TV show, book, whatever you want to say, dark side is always about power. And I think that is a great comparison in life, because a lot of the dark side, the things that will draw you to the dark side, are about power. So it's something to watch for. Whereas the Jedi are about peace, and not in terms of like non-violence, but peace of mind, peace of body, peace of soul, peace of society, like as to become a peaceful person. We talked about this with Tim, Shaun, very early on, was finding peace. And we, Tim and I were both going on the same line of, Oh, you find a peaceful moment. Oh, yes. And then recognize you're in a peaceful moment. That's great. And then you challenged us both to say, what about creating a peaceful moment? What about making that peaceful moment last as long as you can? What about developing that moment into a larger, and that's, I think, in my mind, the dark side versus the light side. Are you seeking power or are you seeking peace? And I think that's what I got. Any final thoughts, Doc C, before we shut her down?
I could just add one thing to that power thing, which is interesting that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people who look for power usually have a lack of control in their own life. And this is one way to get control really quickly for themselves. So something happened to them that they don't have control over it, and that's what they pursue, that power to have control over things. So that's an interesting thought. But again, I think we do have a bright future ahead. And maybe I'm just Pollyannish, but I like Polly. I don't know.
Yeah. Shaun, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I do. So one of the things that we've been saying that I just want to twist the words just a little bit to really make the point is the dark side does pursue power, but you're not pursuing power. You're not controlling power. It's controlling you.
Yes.
And so while you're pursuing it, you have your destiny is in its hands. It's pulling you in. You're not chasing it. You're being absorbed into the dark side. You're not finding your way there. It's sucking you in. You're not earning any power. It's absorbing your power and converting it into evil. And so that is one aspect of, is the dark side powerful? Yeah, over you. Just a thought.
I love that. And here's at the end of the day, we all have a light and we all have a dark side. And it is that it's the battle every day that makes you who you are as a person. And that battle can be easy. It can be hard. It can be all kinds of things, but it's still going to be there every day. But if you wake up every morning, as you said that earlier there, Shaun, and are like ready to attack the day,
expand into the day.
Expand into the day, right? Thank you very much. But that's it. Expand into the day. See what's got for you. Meet it head on and enjoy those challenges. Now, as we learn about our dark side, as we build upon our own light side, we can grow into the better human, better person that we're meant to be. And you can do that every day with us here on The Collective. See y'all tomorrow.
Jedi for the win.
Jedi for the win.